Hello. It is 3 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Mountain, and welcome to part four of our four-part day today. We'll give everybody a couple more minutes to come on in. And we are having a little bit of technical difficulty behind the scenes. So if you can be a little bit patient with us for a couple of minutes, we will see what we can get done here. We've got chat open and questions are open. So if you haven't been on any of the other calls, or if you're in this one, if you would bump in and say where you're from this afternoon, that would be great. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names. So a lot of you have decided to get in some time today with us, and we really appreciate that. Cincinnati. Oh, April made it to Baltimore. We were wondering where you were going from the airport. So congratulations, you made it. Unless, of course, your destination was Florida or something. Maybe you got stuck in Baltimore. I don't know.
Sounds like one of my days, Stacy.
Yeah. You're you're heading this way and then pivot. Okay. Um, oh, snow in Ohio. Daniel's in Tucson. I'm in Phoenix. It's chilly today. It's about 62. So
You keep saying that.
I know.
Yeah, okay, I admit, long sleeves, so yeah, all right.
I know. I know. Lane's in Reynoldsburg. Okay. Let's see what we're going to do. If we have Lane, are you checking your emails? Oh, it's 30 in where David is, David Merrick. That's chilly. I don't, sorry, you guys. Yeah, we're having some technical difficulty on the other side, Ohio. Okay. So I think, do we want to pivot? I'm looking at Daniel. He knows that.
Um, I'm ready to pivot unless they're all
Okay.
just tired of me.
So surprise, we have a different guest speaker today during our fourth hour. Daniel is going to be speaking. We have had some miscommunication with our fourth hour presenter, we believe. And so instead of the IECC, we will see if we can transfer that to another time, another day. Um, we will see, ask Daniel. He has volunteered graciously, so we are all here and ready to hear him on another ADA topic. What would we do without you, Daniel?
I don't have an answer for that.
I know.
Uh, enjoy
We
life.
would suffer. We would suffer.
Okay.
So our apologies, you guys. There was a miscommunication, I guess, at the time because we've not heard from our speaker. Thought we had him lined up. We will correct that next time.
And sorry, I wasn't ready to get my um, getting the presentation going.
No, of course not. We appreciate you.
Trying.
We're all taking five. Everybody needs a little break to take a breath today. And if this is the worst thing that just happens that today, then that's not bad. Thank you, Lane.
Okay, let's see. Get it up on the screen.
We see it.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, uh, good afternoon. I think it's afternoon for everyone now. Um, for those of you that saw part three at the tail end there, there was some questions that came up regarding ANSI, ADA, and some of the changes that have happened with the latest uh, 1117.1. So with that, I have this presentation and it's a fairly new one. I went through, compared ANSI and ADA and when and where to use. So a lot of the front end is going to be very similar to what we talked about, but then we'll start jumping into the differences and the application and kind of the changes that have come out of the ANSI 117. This is registered with the AIA, so you're still going to get your HSW credit. Um, and, uh, and at the end of it, uh, just like we noted in the other presentations, if you attended those, there'll be a link at the end. If you don't receive the link from Zoom, you should get an email tomorrow. And worst case, if you don't get the email, then please just go to CSINext and put part 4 in the comments. Uh, Basically, the learning objective is to um, not understating what is ANSI and ADA, but understanding the difference between the two, and then the significant changes to the ANSI, and comparing the differences in the standards between ANSI and ADA, and then finally taking the approach how to apply it to your design and construction. One of the key things and takeaway is the difference between ADA and ANSI. The ANSI 117.1, and this is 2009. Um, uh, um, I think I pulled up the wrong presentation. However, with that, this really will show the differences between the the two. Keep in mind, ADA is civil law, ANSI is code. So uh, and then after that, you may have state requirements. California, Texas definitely have very detailed accessibility standards. And then even your local area, from counties to cities, may have adoption and amendments to the codes. Always, I recommend always to check what your local uh, requirement is, and it may be all the way up at the top level. ANSI on its own doesn't have any scoping requirements. Um, Keep in mind that it doesn't tell you how many elements must be accessible. It's giving you the technical guidelines. So if supplied, must comply is always the simplest way to remember it. I love that little rhyme. When I first got my registered accessibility specialist, I think that was on day one of that academy. If supplied, must comply. ANSI is referenced in Chapter 11 of the IBC, and the IBC is where your scope is covered. And then ANSI is updated about every 6 years, where the IBC is every 3 years. And so the current ANSI is the 2017. And of course, IBC is now up to 2018, 2021, and just released was the 2024. Same thing, the overview, the building blocks, accessible routes, general site building elements, plumbing, kitchens, communication, and then finally furnishing and equipment. The Access Board, that's the federal agency, they're the ones that maintain the ADA. the Americans Disability Act, or and then sometimes referred to as a standard, or the ADAG. And then you can see what we're going to talk about a little bit is the ADA and the ANSI, how to navigate it. The nice thing is between those two documents, the last revision update of the ADA got in line with the ANSI, which has been around uh, much longer than the 1990 ADA, and ADA was in that 1990 version had a very different layout and organization. We'll touch on tolerance versus static, and then of course the clearances. 10 chapters to the ADA, 11 chapters to the 1117.1. And you can see right there, the big difference is dwelling and sleeping units. There's a chapter in the ANSI that actually covers how to deal with the dwelling and sleeping units. We talked about this a little bit earlier this afternoon, so I'm gonna touch on this as if you didn't go that, but really the difference is range versus absolute dimensions. Simply put, a range is you have a low number and a high number. Absolute is a static number, just like in those two illustrations there. You'll see on the water closet 1618, that means to be built correctly, and is, plumbing, the underground plumbing shows up a lot earlier than the walls, and so they don't have that finite to if you put that water closet line in, you're using overall coordinates maybe based on the column grid or the foundation or something, hoping that that wall lands there. So both, all of the code, the ANSI, the ADA recognize that we can't build this exactly at 18 inches. However, something like the shower, they do have a very static absolute dimension 36. One of the differences in the ANSI compared to the ADA, it does understand construction tolerances, and they are acceptable. So if your authority having jurisdiction and something like concrete, which doesn't get down necessarily always to that finite inch, is make sure you give a heads up to your code official. Once again, in your design, if you're putting in a static dimension, always, as the designer, best practice, best recommendation, pick the number in the middle. In the case of that water closet number up there, 16 to 18, put on your dimension 17. ANSI larger or new in 20 sizes will not apply to existing building or facility. So this 2017 ANSI, think of it this way: go back to the 2009, and it states that in there that your existing buildings use those original dimensions. All new construction will need the new 17 with the larger one. And then once again, an existing building erected prior to the date of the adoption of the standard. So if your building was built prior to 2017 or the official adoption date of maybe your jurisdiction, then it counts as an existing building. Building blocks, these are the pieces and parts that really what we use to begin basing, think of it like, your space planning, the size of something. You can see here, unlike the typical illustration, the clear floor space, 30 inches by 48 inches, you can see the detail, kind of where that comes from. You've got your wheelchair at 28 inches wide. If you include, up to the back of the wheel and the front of the toe kick, 42 inches, and they count a little bit larger than that. The 6 inches, that's for the 48. The 26 that accounts for the hands on each side of the wheel. So that's that clear static floor space, but it's kind of nice to see all those little different nuances of the dimensions. So if we take a step back in the ADA, you've got the classic 48 by 30 inches, but ANSI is now 52 by 30, 6 inches longer. And you can see kind of what's driving that. You have a traditional wheelchair, 30 by 45. A powered wheelchair actually is a little narrower because you don't have the elbows or the hands on the wheel, but the length of it, or the motorized part, is now we're up to 51. And then the scooter, even narrower yet again. And the idea of uh, the smallest scooter is at 20 by 37. The largest scooter in the industry right now is 30 by 54. So the idea is, creating a standard. Do you do the worst case or somewhere in between? And ANSI under 305 has set the new clear floor space at 54 inches long. You can see none of these uh, uh, sizes were greater than that 30-inch. So they left that. And so it's a combination of the worst case between the scooter and the manual wheelchair. Here's the biggest impact for everyone. Um, the classic 60-inch diameter circle. I think we, as designers, contractors, owners, everyone's very familiar with it, creating that turnaround spot. You get yourself into a space with a wheelchair. To get yourself turned around, they've, lots of studies done on this, that it can easily turn around in that 60-inch circle. However, scooters need a little bit more space. And both the classic T still works out to about 60-inch by 60-inch. The benefit of the T, you can see you've got and it's almost like a 3-point turn with a car. That's what the T has done. So with a scooter, they have a little larger requirement. You can see there the 60 by 68. So, and then you also don't have quite the clean corners anymore with the way those scooters turn. And then that overall circle is 66 inches. One of the differences too between, while it's a larger clear floor space for the circle, you can see there's less knee and toe clearance because, the human body is almost completely encapsulated in that scooter. Um, and then they identify, so basically what they're saying with that toe space is you could have some overlap with like a toilet partition. Not much of a change in the reach range. They've still kept that the same regardless of the device you're on. It's that range is between 15 and 48. The operable parts of anything that could be a paper towel dispenser, um, doorknobs, whatever it is, has to fall between that 15 and 48 inches. Think of it also as, a plug. If you have a duplex plug on, on the floor, being all the way, a floor plug does not comply. However, on the wall, if that bottom plug is above the 15 inches, that's the operable part, then you have compliance. The exception in the ADA is gas pumps. ANSI has a lot of um, exceptions, and I mentioned briefly uh, uh, the floor receptacle. ADA is blind to it. ANSI understands that you can't raise the floor. That basically, you know, putting a pedestal on 15 inches for a floor outlet creates a new, public safety trip hazard. So those have an exemption. If it's a receptacle for a dedicated use, maybe a copy machine or a printer, something that doesn't get moved around. They understand, medical devices are not going to get moved. You can actually have different heights that may fall outside because typically it's not a general use. Things aren't being plugged and unplugged. Um, one kitchen receptacle uh, can be outside of the reach range, and that can be reaching over something. Maybe you have a plug on the underside of a cabinet. Uh, as long as you provide other plugs that meet the reach range and clearances, you're okay. HVAC diffusers, they can still be up near the ceiling fans, any kind of redundant control. If you have one that's in compliance, you can have as many redundancies that are outside of the reach range and so forth. Sorry about that. I should have closed my door. You heard the dogs. um, the accessible route. Quite a change between ANSI and ADA. Let's kind of talk about some of those changes. So the classic ADA is 36 inches wide. That was plenty of room to even turn a corner. You could be 36 by 36. What they're discovering with these larger elements, i.e. the scooter or motorized wheelchairs, that they adjusted. So under the ANSI, there's 4 different options, and both legs, 40 by 28, or you can have an 8-inch chamfer if you're still 36 by 36. One leg at 38, the other at 42, and then one at 36 and one at 44. And then you can see also your chamfer. Another option is you could 28 inches in each length, 4 inches wider. So basically you're for 28 inches each direction, you're 40 inches wide. So just keep that in mind when you have a 90, a corridor that's maybe going, around some interior office spaces, that all your uh, corridors can't be narrow. One thing that I do like to note, though, also in the code is your minimum corridor width is 44 inches. So technically, you're never narrower than 44, which means all of these options in the ANSI would be compliant, unless there is, an exception to a corridor width.
Hey, Daniel, there's a question, and it kind of, for me, kind of spurs off of this, especially when it comes to renovation projects. How many projects we go into renovate that have very narrow corridors already, and 90 degrees are never going to have the offset, very, very rarely have an offsetting width like that's going to accommodate this. And the question is, how do renovation projects to existing buildings factor into what standard is applied and what needs to be brought up to current standard?
And that goes back to that definition of existing buildings. In the ADA, and I can do a little deeper research to find out, it used to be value of the tenant improvement, let's say, of an existing building, whether it fell, uh, and I believe the value of it of the original building, 20% or something like that. If you're doing, a minor renovation, you wouldn't have to comply with the newer code. Once again, your authority having jurisdiction, there may be a local amendment that might have a requirement to, bring everything up. But that definition of an existing building and working with that would fall under the 2009 is my understanding, but I certainly can dig a little deeper into that. I haven't had that. It's been quite a while since I've done a renovation. Most of my work in my profession of late has been new construction.
That makes sense. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Kind of the same thing with the U-turn. You can see quite a few differences. You've got, if you're coming in at 36 inches of your existing corridor and you're making that U-turn, if X is less than 52 inches, and that's the space between the U-turn, then you need 60 inches. And then you can see how that cross space 43 to 43 to 43, and all these are based on that minimum width if it's less than 52 inches. When you're greater than 52, your width and your turns, you're basically getting down to that L-shaped turn when that gap between is greater than 52. Couple minor changes to doors. Everyone, I'm sure, is just as you start to learn the 16 different door combinations, they're revisiting that again. This is probably the biggest change in the new ANSI, the maneuvering clearance. They used to, in that 12-inch, you could count that as knee and toe clearance. And you could see in this example here how you could maybe have like a drinking fountain in it and still be in compliance because you could maneuver with the door. That 12 inches now has to, you can't use that knee and toe space or anything. It has to be clear. And once again, a lot of what's driving this is how the new accessible mode of transportation is, the powered wheelchairs and the scooters. They need that full clearance because they're basically, I hate to say boxy, but they go from wheels, edges, so forth in the vertical. And if you've ever seen the scooters, they've got the cool little, I want to get the banana bar on the back and the hot rod handlebars, but you do have a little bit of changes there. And then your door maneuvering sizes on your, once again, your front approach. This is probably the biggest one. I just talked about this in the last one. If both closer and latch are provided, you need that 12 inches. On the push side, they haven't really changed that, but you'll see the change is not so much the 12 inches, but where you could get away with the 48, now you have to be 52 inches clear. So the depth has changed, but everything else about the door, and this is the only minor change in door maneuvering, is instead of 48 inches, it's 52, which falls back into that clear floor space. Doors in series, I think they were a lot more forgiving in how they work, but you can see now the distance between the two. You have to, in the previous one, it was a little bit blind to it, and they took into account you go through one door, the door might have to close, and then you begin opening the other one. Now what they want in doors in series is that turnaround space, and you can see your absolute minimum is now that 64 by 60. Street and parking. Um, this is a new section, angled parking. They're actually recognizing it now, that it may be a little different than head-in parking. Once again, when you're angled, you have a different curb cut. So that old 66 or 60-inch aisle at an angle has a little different dimension to it. So now what they're requiring, if you have angled parking, you have to do the 96, which unfortunately is a little bit of a conflict in um, 96 inches feels like a parking base as your um, uh, stripes wear away. Um, so I haven't seen or heard how people are addressing that. You almost with an aisle, possibly a car bumper at the end to help resist that. It's very important, obviously, for the van to be able to, extend it out or get your door when you're in a car to swing fully open. Um, but that is one of the changes that they've done is uh, the the angled aisle is 96 inches. Parallel street parking, this is a little different. You used to be able to lean on the curb as part of it. So now when you have, uh, not only do you have the on-street parking space, which you normally stripe, you now have to have an additional 67 inches and marked off like a parking aisle. Once again, same thing to be able to get the, car doors open and to, uh, really meet that zone to get in and out of your vehicle. Um, Everything else still applies. Detectable warnings required at curb ramps, blended transitions, at pedestrian street crossings. So they've expanded the detectable warning. The original ADA was uh, a lot of misunderstanding to that. Then when the 2010 came out, they had an initial pause and then they finally decided how to address it, that it's only on a public way. And what that means is if you had a parking space and all you had was a curb ramp, you could have the curb ramp without, if it just went to a parking aisle without the detectable warning. Some exceptions to that is under like California Title 24. They actually require that detectable warning regardless at any curb ramp. And the the challenge there is detectable warnings are for the blind or visually impaired. That's why they're always a contrasting color in the raised domes, the truncated domes. The downside is those truncated domes are very difficult to navigate in a wheelchair. And the idea was, well, if I'm parking and I have a curb ramp, obviously I'm not visually impaired. Um, to go up the curb ramp. However, if a taxi parked there to drop you off, you could be both in a wheelchair and visually impaired. So they keep trying to find that middle ground for truncated domes, but really you want to think of it. Am I putting someone in harm's way with a curb ramp and, you know, dropping off into any kind of drive aisle traffic, etc., where cars are in motion? This is probably one of the biggest additions from the original ADA and even the 2009 ANSI pay station and electric charging. Um, as we get more electric vehicles on the road, how do we address that? And so good news is we've got a lot of pieces and parts already, from clear floor spaces, reach ranges, operable parts, the exception of a gas pump. Um, the other changes, route not to be obstructed by cords and barriers. So if you have a charging station and you're supplying any, you can kind of see in the picture there where uh, these units are to the side, nothing is obstructing it. No cords, no barriers, as long as you can still reach that charging handle. You can see you've got the two bollards, which you want to protect it from the vehicle if someone turns a little wide. But at the same time, you need to be able to, if you're in a wheelchair or have accessibility challenges, need to be able to meet that reach range. And there's that you can see here, these four sections now cover uh, uh, pay, sta pay stations and electric charging. Another new item, uh, and really saw a big change in, I think how we approach just water in general and saving use, hygiene. COVID is another one of those great examples of shifting, those common use elements, and bottle filling stations create quite a change in, instead of adding plastic to, the landfills, carry around your own bottle. If you've so made that choice, how do I fill it up? Well, I don't want to fill it up with a drinking fountain where someone's, I hate to say this, some 6-year-old kid, mouthed it. Um, However, they now uh, simply state, if you have a bottle filling station, all of the other, you need it to be accessible. So if there's any kinds of buttons to push, it has to be within the reach range. You can't have the drinking fountain extend so far out that you can't reach the buttons or reach to hold your bottle, etc. It's not the other way around. Think of it that way. As long as all your controls are accessible, uh, um, standing or in a wheelchair, um, you, and that's kind of a large, uh, if you, drinking fountains are kind of those oddities in, um, you're required to have a high and a low. One is for people that can't bend over. Stooping is a challenge. That's an accessible issue as compared to, drinking fountains for those in wheelchairs. Those are pretty low. So that's why you always have that high-low difference. Stall options. Another change there is how far the toes can extend beyond. Um, Once again, toe clearance at the front of the partition is not required if you're greater than 64 inches for a wall hung or 67 inches for a floor mounted. Um, Side partitions not required if your width is greater than 68 inches. However, if you're at the absolute minimums for your accessible stall, and you can kind of see in the illustration, make sure you allow for that toe clearance. And you can see now it's up 12 inches, and it was kind of interesting. Was there a standard, you know, uh, um, for other countries and so forth? And anyone who's done any traveling, the toilet partition that uh, is up off the floor, so forth. That's very much an American thing. Um, so that's where you take advantage of that clear toe space. Uh, Stall options. Once again, the size of the stalls have changed. Um, and you can see here the accommodation is less about the wheelchair and what is that largest element, i.e. the scooter. So you can see now we're up to 60 inches by 84 inches. Um, Doors shall not swing into the clear floor space. So you can see here they show the swing going both ways. If you're required to be 60 by 84, you're going to have the door swing out. To get the door to swing in, you can see um, where in that other example, and that's based on, once again, your toilet size compartment, 60 inches by 59 inches for a floor mounted water closet. You can have the door swing in. Just remember, you have to meet all the requirements of the door, uh, and then you can swing it into the partition. Kitchen versus break rooms. The interesting piece here is the very clear definition now of a kitchenette in the ANSI. It's always been kind of implied and understood. And with that, they now have
Very good point.
taken they've taken into approach that in a kitchenette, you're allowed to have that parallel approach to the sink, where in the past, I always wanted that clear knee space. So that's a benefit that you're not washing dishes per se like you are in a regular kitchen. Also, it's very clear that in a kitchenette, you don't need that work surface space. That's that 30-inch space where you can get the knees under the counter to cut, prep, cook, etc. Um, and then also in a kitchenette, unlike a kitchen, you don't have to have the full turnaround. The idea is you can come in and back out, where in a kitchen you either have to have that complete turnaround or to be able to pass all the way through the kitchen from one side to the other. So you can see in these two graphic examples, you can have a small U-turn, and then from the front of your refrigerator, you can get as narrow as 40 inches at any appliance, or for that matter, a cabinet. We kind of touched on this earlier: operable parts, kitchen outlet, exception. Once again, most of your kitchens, you have that area where if you need a plug, great example is like behind the refrigerator. You're never going to move the refrigerator. Behind the range, you're never going to move the range. So you don't have to create those within the reach ranges. At the same time, you can see when you're in the corner in this example, that countertop, as long as it's less than 9 square feet and doesn't exceed that, then you also have some exceptions to those reach ranges and clearances. So it does allow, in this example, a refrigerator, a little piece of corner cabinet, and then a range, that 9 square feet, basically that's, 3 feet by 3 feet, doesn't have to be in all of those compliances. Hopefully I'm not talking too fast. One of the changes, especially this one, I think really came out of when started doing more of the telemedical industry, meeting with, creating separation during COVID. So if you have a visual relay service booth, you have to, under 7047 in the ANSI, you have to meet all of these requirements. Seating for one user, privacy enclosure. So keep that in mind. If you put in, any kind of furniture, you still got to meet in that enclosure, the rest of the space requirements. You can't make it as, 3 feet wide by 3 feet deep, even though that would, probably fit most people. If you come in a scooter, you've got to meet those same requirements. Two-way video communication actually is a requirement. You can kind of see in, in these slides down at the bottom that that visual communication is required just for that hearing impaired, or if you're needing to share any of that information. And then the um, the lost my train of thought there. Apologize for that. And then the final part is that background is flat, non-textured finish in bright green or blue range. This really is to help to create that contrast between um, um, the the speaker and either the interpreter, kind of the idea of I like to always call it the green screen. The idea there is it does allow for a high contrast to the person on the other end of the video. Once again, the changes between ANSI and ADA, highly recommend as you get the ANSI, this is kind of an overview of those changes as, we get an aging population, more people needing, this approach to the design of your facility. I would always recommend, let's take the approach of the worst case, even though you may not need to have anything greater than, your 60-inch turning radius or 36-inch wide corridor and so forth. So I always recommend, can you do the current worst case? And once again, I think it creates successful projects. Any other questions, Stacy? And I know that was a lot, and I apologize. I was a little off my game on this, not practicing beforehand.
There, no, that's fantastic. And actually, it was just segue just straight to the last you did really you need to do that. It takes 7 times for short-term memory to remember anything. So that's only 2. So now you have to do this again 5 more times before we'll actually start retaining it.
Right?
I don't see any questions. I don't have any questions.
I,
Does
I
anybody
love the
have any
last
follow-up or
webinar of the
project
day.
related? Oh gosh, it's
You,
it's been
you
all
leave them
very good.
speechless.
Any questions? Well, for you to pitch hit like that is amazing. I do want to say that while you were speaking, I did get a message behind the scenes that our speaker, Alex Smith, did try to log in, but basically he was in a medical emergency with his granddaughter, so he was not able to make it at the very last minute. So he has been apologizing profusely, and of course, we are glad that everything's okay on his end at this point.
Yes.
But we will work to get him rescheduled. So stay tuned to the details. Hopefully, we'll get him. We're already booked out January, February, March, I believe. So we're going to try to get him for April, May, or June. So with that, if there's no other questions, well done. If you're seeing in the chat there, well done. Have a Merry Christmas. Thank you all, and be sure and stay on for um, a quick blurb about the certificate. Or tomorrow there should be an email that comes through about the certificate, and if it does not, you can just go to our website and you can go under any of the different sessions, and you may fill it out manually, but you'll be able to get something. And if at the end of the day you can't, just reach out to us through the website. We are here for you. So thank you, and I hope you guys have a great holiday season.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.